He was just a quiet single dad sitting in seat 14A. Until one word made every pilot on that plane stand to attention. The Delta Airlines plane was taxiing toward the runway at Seattle Airport. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the curved window, casting a soft glow across the face of the man seated in row 14A. His name was Ethan Walker, 38 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple olive green jacket. His eyes were calm, but behind that stillness lay a storm of memories that had never truly slept. Beside him, his 9-year-old son Lucas was busy playing with a plastic model airplane. Each time the real engines outside thundered to life, the boy would look up in pure delight, eyes shining. "Dad, look! Those are F-22s, right? Just like the ones you told me about in your stories." Ethan smiled, a smile both warm and faintly bittersweet. He leaned toward the window where 2 fighter jets glided across the distant sky, their metallic sheen flashing under the sun. "That's right, son. F-22 Raptors. They're fast, so smooth you can barely hear them. You know, I used to fly those once." Lucas's eyes widened with amazement. "Really, Dad? I thought you just made those stories up." Ethan gently ruffled his son's hair, a tender sadness flickering in his gaze. "Yeah, really. But sometimes there are things we have to leave behind, even the ones we once loved more than anything." He leaned back against his seat, eyes drifting toward the cabin ceiling as he exhaled softly. It had been 2 years since his wife Anna passed away, and 15 years since he'd left the skies. People said leaving the military was simply turning a new page, but for Ethan, it was the hardest landing of his life. Outside, a gentle breeze pushed clouds across the horizon. Inside, the laughter of children mingled with the flight attendants' safety instructions. Everyone was absorbed in their own little worlds, except for Ethan. He sat quietly, fingers wrapped around the worn dog tag that hung from his neck. No one knew that the quiet man in seat 14A had once been a legend of the U.S. Air Force, a pilot known by the call sign Ghost, the Phantom of the Sky. But now, he was no longer Ghost. He was simply Ethan Walker, a single father, learning to live again, one day at a time, beside the son he swore he'd never lose. The plane was still waiting for clearance to take off. Inside the cabin, the glow of sunset streamed through the windows, painting everyone's faces with a soft, honey hue. The air was calm. Only the low hum of the engines and Lucas's cheerful voice filled the space as he chatted with his dad about the dream plane. Across the aisle, a woman in her mid-30s looked up from her laptop. Elegant in a navy blue blazer, she had overheard parts of the father and son conversation. A faint smile tugged at her lips, the kind of smile born of curiosity, tempered by courtesy. Closing her laptop gently, she leaned slightly toward them. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but did I hear you say F-22 Raptor? Were you in the Air Force?" Ethan turned, polite and reserved. He nodded slightly, offering a cautious smile. "Yes, a long time ago. Now it's just a memory." The woman extended her hand, her tone confident yet warm. "I'm Rachel Hayes. I'm a journalist with Air and Space Today. I'm currently working on a feature about modern-era fighter pilots, those who've left the skies but still carry them in their hearts." Her words made Ethan pause for a moment. Something in them touched him. Maybe memory, maybe loss, or perhaps that rare feeling of being truly seen. He shook her hand politely. "Ethan Walker. Nice to meet you." Lucas looked up, eyes sparkling with excitement. "You know what? My dad used to fly those planes. They were super fast." Rachel chuckled softly, her expression warm. Is that so? Then your dad must be a very brave man. Ethan placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, his voice calm and steady. Lucas, remember what I told you? Don't bother other people, okay? But Rachel quickly waved her hand, still smiling. No, it's fine. I like hearing kids talk, especially when it's about the parent they look up to most. The air between the three of them lightened. Rachel leaned in, curiosity flickering in her eyes. So, what did you fly? F-16s? F-18s? Ethan hesitated briefly, a shadow of memory crossing his gaze. F-22s. I served with them for nearly 8 years. Rachel froze, her eyes widening with awe and respect. F-22 Raptors? My God, that's the elite of the elite. I've interviewed a few pilots. They said fewer than 200 people in the world are qualified to fly those. Ethan only smiled faintly and lowered his head. I was just lucky. The truly great ones were my teammates. Rachel fell silent for a few seconds, studying him. The calm demeanor, the humble tone, the quiet eyes that seemed to hold an entire sky within them. She knew. People who had once flown at those heights never truly left the sky. They simply carried it with them, quietly, inside their hearts. You know, Rachel said softly, her voice blending into the gentle rumble of the engines. I've always believed that the quiet ones often have the most extraordinary stories to tell. Ethan looked at her, a faint smile crossing his face, half sorrow, half gratitude. What he didn't know was that, just a few minutes later, the story he'd tried so hard to keep hidden for years would echo through the entire cabin. The soft hum of the engines continued to fill the cabin. Outside, the sunset was fading. The last streaks of gold stretched across the silver fuselage. Rachel flipped open her notebook, pen poised in hand, unable to hide the curiosity in her eyes. She leaned slightly toward Ethan and asked gently, You said you used to fly F-22s. May I ask one more thing? Fighter pilots often have unique call signs. What was yours? Ethan fell silent. That seemingly harmless question suddenly cast a quiet weight between them. He turned toward the window, where the sunlight was melting into a sea of clouds. The soft amber glow lit his face, revealing the lines time had etched there, and the ghosts of memories he had never truly spoken of. My call sign, he repeated, voice low and deliberate, as if choosing each word with care. Lucas looked up eagerly. You had a nickname, Dad? Tell me what it was. Ethan smiled faintly at his son, though his eyes drifted somewhere far away. He knew. Sometimes a name isn't just a name. It carries with it sleepless nights, sweat, tears, and the blood of those who never came home. A pause lingered between them. Rachel sensed his hesitation and was about to change the subject when Ethan finally spoke slowly, almost in a whisper meant for her alone. Ghost. A beat of silence. No one reacted at first. Then, a man 3 rows ahead suddenly turned around, eyes wide, disbelief written across his face. Excuse me? Did you just say ghost? Ethan blinked, startled, glancing toward him. The man wore a simple shirt, but the pilot's watch on his wrist, along with his disciplined stance, revealed his background instantly. Unbuckling his seatbelt, he rose and stepped closer. Major Mark Daniels, United States Air Force. I served out of Langley. Sir, are you Ghost from Red Flag? The cabin stirred with murmurs. Rachel looked at Ethan, confused. unsure what was unfolding before her. Ethan sighed softly and gave a slight nod. I flew at Red Flag, yes. Major Daniels froze for a moment, then broke into a disbelieving, emotional laugh, lowering his voice out of respect. My God, I've heard about you my entire career. Ghost, the pilot who scored 17 simulated kills in 5 days, never once getting locked on. They said you were practically invisible on radar. A living legend. The entire cabin went silent. Passengers turned in their seats, eyes filled with awe and curiosity. Lucas looked up at his father, eyes wide as the truth dawned on him. Dad, you're a ghost? For real? Ethan gave a faint smile and shook his head gently. No, son. I'm just someone who used to fly beside men far better than me. Major Daniels shook his head, voice steady but full of admiration. You can say that, but we all know the truth. There isn't a single pilot from Red Flag who doesn't know your name. Ghost, the man the entire sky respected. Rachel's hand trembled slightly around her pen. She wasn't taking notes anymore. She was living the moment, watching a legend, a silent symbol of courage, quietly revealed in the middle of an ordinary flight. The cabin sank into a respectful hush. Ethan lowered his head slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. The things you've heard, they're just stories. I only did the job I was given. That simple, humble line, carried with such quiet weight, left Rachel holding her breath. The cabin seemed to fall utterly still. All the small noises, the murmur of conversation, the shuffle of luggage, the laughter of children, faded into silence after Major Daniels spoke. You're the legend of Red Flag, Ghost. They still say that during one training week you took down 17 targets, a record no one has ever touched. An older woman across the aisle leaned slightly forward, her kind eyes filled with quiet respect. So, you're a hero then, aren't you? Ethan looked at her, his expression sincere, humble. He smiled faintly, a calm, weary smile carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much of war. No, ma'am. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come home. A long silence followed. No one spoke. Not even Rachel, whose instincts as a journalist usually pushed her to fill every pause. Instead, she looked down at her open notebook, then slowly set her pen aside, as if realizing that no words could do this justice. Lucas tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, they said you did brave things. What did you do? Ethan looked at his son, eyes soft yet deep, heavy with truths a child could never fully understand. Sometimes, son, good people have to do tough things to keep others safe. Not because they want to fight, but because they have no other choice. Lucas stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded, his young eyes shining, not fully understanding, but sensing something vast and sacred in his father's words. Major Daniels watched the two of them, his face solemn with respect. He wanted to say something, but instead he just sat down quietly, honoring the fragile peace that had filled the cabin. Rachel's gaze never left Ethan. She spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper meant for him alone. You know, I've interviewed dozens of pilots, but none of them talked about maneuvers or victories. They all talked about you, the man who taught them that courage isn't about pulling the trigger. It's about knowing when not to. Ethan smiled, a genuine smile but tinged with sadness. They were good men. I was just lucky to fly beside them. He turned his eyes toward the window where two F-22s still glided high above, their metallic wings catching the last blaze of the sunset. "The sky is always fair," Ethan said quietly. "It doesn't care who's better. It only keeps those who respect it." Rachel's throat tightened. She no longer saw a soldier or a pilot before her, but a man who had faced the edge of life and death and chosen silence to preserve what humanity he had left. The cabin remained motionless, almost reverent. Only the steady hum of the engines filled the air, like the heartbeat of the moment itself. And in that stillness, no one spoke. Yet everyone understood. Not every hero wears a medal. Some carry only a scar upon their chest, and within their hearts, an entire sky no one else will ever know. The cabin remained utterly still. Those who had once been curious now simply sat in silence, afraid that even a breath too loud might shatter the fragile sanctity of the moment. Major Daniels turned toward Ethan, his voice heavy with both respect and reflection. "Sir, with your skill set, you could have become a commander or a combat instructor. Why did you leave the Air Force?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hand, at the tarnished silver wedding band still wrapped around his finger, a habit he'd never been able to let go of. Then he lifted his gaze toward Lucas sitting beside him, eyes wide and fixed on the adults' quiet exchange. Ethan's eyes softened, and then he spoke, slowly, honestly, in a voice that seemed to weigh down every heart in the cabin. "Because my son lost his mother, and I didn't want him to lose his father too." Silence enveloped the air. Lucas turned toward him, his small voice trembling. "Dad." Ethan rested a hand on his son's shoulder, warm, steady, but thick with emotion. "Your mom passed away in an accident 2 years ago. I was overseas at the time, on a mission. I only made it back in time to say goodbye. And from that day on, I swore I'd never let you grow up through a screen again." He drew in a quiet breath, steadying his voice. "I used to believe the sky was where I belonged. But when I saw you crying in that empty house, I realized something. Sometimes, the bravest thing a soldier can do is to land and stay." The words hung in the air, still and weightless, like the hush before dawn. An older woman in the front wiped at her tears. The businessman across the aisle closed his laptop, staring blankly ahead. And Rachel, the journalist who once believed hero was a word reserved for grand acts of valor, now sat frozen, clutching her notebook, lost for words. "That must have been the hardest decision of your life," she whispered, voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his eyes glimmering beneath the golden cabin light. "The hardest, but also the right one. Flying was everything I ever knew. But my son, he's the reason I still want to live." Lucas gripped his father's hand tightly, looking up with quiet certainty. "I'm glad you came home, Dad. I don't need you to be a pilot. I just need you." Ethan smiled, a trembling smile, fragile yet beautiful beyond words. He squeezed his son's hand back. "And I just need you, kiddo." Rachel watched them, and in that instant, the image before her was no longer of a war hero, but of a man who had chosen love over glory. She spoke softly, almost like a confession. People often think heroes are the ones who soar the highest. But maybe real heroes are the ones who know when it's time to come home. The plane still hadn't taken off, yet somehow everyone felt it. Inside that small, quiet cabin, another kind of flight was already underway. A father, gently landing in the heart of his son. The captain's voice came over the intercom, deep, steady, and familiar. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for takeoff. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for our flight from Seattle to Dallas. The engines rumbled softly beneath the floor. The cabin began to tremble gently as the light outside shifted, a golden wash spilling across the clouds. Major Daniels, who had earlier stood to greet Ethan, remained silent. He lowered his head slightly and spoke, not as a fellow officer in awe of a legend, but as a man speaking from the heart to another man, to a father. Sir, with your talent, you could have been a commander, a combat instructor. Why did you step away? Ethan smiled faintly, eyes calm and grateful. Thank you, Major, but I think I'm teaching a different kind of lesson now, to the most critical student I'll ever have. He turned toward Lucas. The boy sat there, still holding his father's hand tightly, his face lit with the kind of pride only a child could carry. Rachel, the journalist, slowly closed her laptop, work forgotten. Her voice softened, sincere. Mr. Walker, if you ever decide to share your story, I believe people need to hear it. Not for the battles you fought, but for the things you chose to let go. Ethan met her gaze with a gentle smile, light as a breath. Maybe someday, but right now, my most important mission is sitting right beside me. The plane began to accelerate. Outside the window, the ground slipped away, shrinking, fading until it vanished beneath a sea of clouds. Lucas pressed his face to the window, eyes wide with wonder. Dad, look, we're flying. Ethan followed his son's gaze, the sunlight reflecting in his eyes, half sky, half hope. Yeah, son, but remember, not everyone needs to fly high to be a hero. Sometimes, just loving the right people at the right time is enough. Lucas rested his head on his father's shoulder and whispered, When I grow up, I want to be just like you. Ethan smiled, a trembling, beautiful smile. He ran his hand through his son's hair, his voice gentle but resolute, carrying the quiet wisdom of a man who'd seen life's edges. Then be kind, be honest, and always put family first. The rest will find you. Outside, the plane broke through the thick clouds and rose into a clear blue sky. Sunlight poured through the cabin. Ethan closed his eyes and smiled softly. In that moment, the man once known across the world as Ghost, the phantom of the sky, finally found peace. Not in the roar of engines, not in the flare of red tracers across a night sky, but here, among the quiet clouds, in a narrow airplane cabin, holding the hand of his little boy. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary acts of heroism don't happen in the sky. They happen in the moments we choose to come home. Ethan's large hand clasped Lucas's small one. Together, they gazed out the window where the light shimmered in their eyes, a light made of love, of hope, of everything ordinary yet profoundly beautiful. He once protected the sky from danger. Now, all he wants is to protect the little heart that calls him Dad. And perhaps, That is the most significant victory of all. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that love will always be greater than glory. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep telling more beautiful, true stories like this one. Because not all heroes live in the sky. Some choose to come home, to hold a small hand, and live fully for what truly matters.